So you can hear from my accent, I'm American, but I am also now Swiss. That's because I married a Swiss guy, despite this story that I'm about to tell you about him. So how I all started getting interested in forests, my first project during the MBA, we went to Belize in Central America with a foundation here, the Papillarama Butterfly Gardens, you might know. And they were looking to purchase an area of forest, and we were looking at sustainable projects, business development projects they could do in the forest. And we drove, they were looking to buy a big piece of land, and we drove about an hour down some really bad logging roads into the middle of the forest, and we're walking around looking at all the species. And we come back to the truck, and the cute Swiss guy that was leading our project, Caspar, my now husband, couldn't find the key to the truck. So we're like a 6-hour walk from the nearest village. It's getting dark. And he did finally find the key. It was in a secret pocket in his camera bag. But there was a moment of panic, and now, 20 years later, unfortunately, they were not able to purchase that forest, and this is what it looks like now. It would have been very easy, unfortunately, to find his key in this landscape. And as I look back on my career, more and more of our world is looking like this, with the main driver really being agriculture. And we have not been able to crack this nut of how to protect forests. This is an area of deforestation that I was just visiting in Borneo just before the pandemic, which was being cleared probably for palm oil. So we've seen more and more companies don't want to be linked with deforestation, but at the same time, food companies, agriculture, mining also is driving 80% of global deforestation. It's still 10% of our carbon emissions, and we cannot seem to find the tools that companies need to actually protect these forests. So I've been working in sustainable supply chains with another NGO called Earthworm in Geneva, and we've been looking at how companies are saying they want to go deforestation free, and yet aren't able to protect these forests. And a report came out from Chain Reaction Research about 6 million hectares of forest just in Indonesia that were slated for agricultural development, mostly palm oil. And we said, what would it take to move that land into protection? And when you look at how companies are doing no deforestation, basically they're buying from farms that were deforested a long time ago. So there's been a lot of advances in traceability to make sure they're not buying from new farms and transparency. And you can build a deforestation-free supply chain pretty easily. But actually protecting the forest next door that's at risk of deforestation for a competitor or for another product is not that easy. And so we said, what if we came up with a tool that made it easy for companies to not just go deforestation-free, but actually forest positive and conserve forest in their supply chains. And we have a real opportunity. Half of our planet is still wild, so we have this global goal of protecting 50% of the Earth by 2050. You may have heard of it, Nature Needs Half movement. Half of the planet is still wild. Only 15% of our planet is actually under protection. So there's a lot of forest there that's still there that we need to move into protection. At the same time, we're learning now, it's been being proven, that indigenous people are actually the best protectors of forests because their whole social and cultural identity is tied up in forests, not to mention their livelihoods, and it's sacred for them, it is their identity. So their interests are very much aligned with our planetary interests of saving these places. And if you look at the overlap of where indigenous territories and forests are still standing, there's quite a good Venn diagram there. So we said, how can we link up these indigenous and local communities that want to protect forests with businesses that say they want to protect forests, buying in those landscapes? So we launched a new foundation called the Forest Conservation Fund, based in Geneva. And really, we are trying to link, these buyers and donors and investors from far away with excellent projects in tropical landscapes especially. So we're bridging and doing the quality assurance, and I'll explain that. So we're, like I said, a not-for-profit foundation based in Geneva. We work with whoever wants to invest in the landscape. So it could be food companies that are buying from the landscape, or it could be companies that use mined products or paper or anything, really. We all are linked to tropical forests. And we identify excellent local conservation projects. Usually it's indigenous or local communities that have decided to set aside their forests and need funding for protection and biodiversity monitoring, but also alternative livelihoods. And then we We do all the due diligence on the land tenure and make sure there's no land conflict, and we support them on their monitoring, and we do also satellite monitoring, and then we repackage the impact information back to the donor, so photos and stories and videos. We have a team as a small secretariat, so I have a colleague in Indonesia and a colleague in the UK. Our board is a mixture of private sector experience as well as social and environmental NGOs. Our grants committee is really conservation and social human rights specialists. They vet all of our projects and do quality assurance on them as well. So all of our projects run through a strong due diligence process at the beginning. We're working in across 13 projects, about 120,000 hectares in our portfolio in 8 countries, a lot in Southeast Asia. And we're really looking at those forest frontiers where commodity and mining, farming and mining are driving deforestation. So we look, on the tropical landscapes, so cocoa and palm oil and cattle, but also gold mining and even coal mining. And we're finding these community-based projects that are linked then to supply chains. And when we ran the numbers on actually how much it costs to protect these areas, and we said, okay, what would it take for a product to really be deforestation-free and forest positive? Would be it's protecting an equivalent amount of forest to what it needs to grow that product or mine that product, you could say. And when we ran the numbers on that, it actually only costs 1% to 2% more of whatever it costs to produce that cocoa or palm oil or rubber or whatever to protect an equivalent amount of forest. And when we saw that, we just said, well, this is something that the industry can easily integrate to make something really forest positive. So of our projects, I had to pick one to pitch to you guys today. This is a project that we just approved in Indonesia. So you saw we're on the Indonesian part of Borneo Island, and it's called Lesan River Forest. And it's over 9,000 hectares of primary tropical rainforest. And the communities there, they know they need the forest for many things. So it provides them with spiritual value and cultural value, but food and their clean water, and they know that. And actually in 2008, they asked the government, they were worried about their forests being handed out to a pulp and paper concession or a palm oil concession. So they asked the government, please declare this a protected area. And the government did, but unfortunately, the government has no financing to actually protect this area. So the community is watching it, illegal loggers coming in and hunting, and they're watching it slowly being degraded. And there's a local NGO there, Conservation Action Network, CAN Indonesia, who has been working with the community more on conservation side. So they do a lot of rescued animals from the wildlife trade, so reintroducing captured orangutans back into the forest and working with the communities. And we said, why don't you guys work with the community too and the government to actually protect this area? So that's what we're seeking finance for today. You can see that's a coal mining project, and the orangutan's habitat has been lost there, and they're trying to get to a nice bit of forest. So what they need is 1.1 million to protect this forest for the next 3 years. And it's basic things like putting up signs and demarcating the forest. Right now, there's no even indication that you're in a protected area. It's doing patrols jointly with the community and the forest department. But it's also handling all of these social issues that we've been hearing about in other projects. So there is quite a bit of human-wildlife conflict. So there's a lot of primates left in the forests, but their habitat is being encroached on, and they don't have enough food in their forests, so they're going into people's farms to forage for fruit. So one of the solutions to this is to plant fruit trees on the border so that an orangutan doesn't need to then go into the neighboring farm to be able to eat. But also investing in alternative livelihoods outside of the forest so that the community is thriving next to the forest and they don't need to go in and illegally log to feed their families. And then finally, conservation education, which is an important part of any conservation project. We do, as I said, Forest Conservation Fund does the satellite monitoring. If there is an alert, the communities are required to go and investigate it, reforest the area if necessary. So that's what the money is going to go for. And then just lastly, why do companies invest in Forest Conservation Fund? We have some carbon benefits. I could talk about those. I think there's 1.6 million tons stored in the forest, in this particular forest. But really it's about this connection that they can make with a local community, usually very colorful indigenous culture that they can talk about. So on the left here, you have Waitrose Supermarkets in the UK that is actually protecting an area in a different part of Borneo with an indigenous community. And they talk about it with their customers, and they show pictures of the community that is protecting this area and all the wildlife as well. And this project actually just won Indonesia's most prestigious environmental award, the Kalpataru Award. So there's a lot of co-benefits for marketing or however you want to see about it, but really it's about that connection, feeling we are connected through the products that we buy and making that a positive connection. And then the other photos from a media trip that we organized to our Philippines project and the Washington Post ran some really nice, beautiful photo essays if you want to look it up. So it's not just about the carbon, it's not just about the biodiversity, but it's really about this connection and partnerships and help bringing that into your brand or your investment product or whatever it may be. There's a lot of intangible benefits to that, I would say. I think that's it. I think I spoke too fast. I'm in time, as usual. American speaking too fast, but thank you.
That was